Hi everybody, today we are going to paint some Art Deco inspired bugs. And for that we will need paper, pencil, eraser, sharpener, paint, something to mix the paint, brushes, water, cloth. We will be using the same technique from the previous video where we start by staining the canvas because this helps prevent the stark white background and gives the artwork an aged vintage look. Once it's dry, we can begin our design, okay? On the previous video, I walked through a simple method for designing insects using a grid template. This technique makes it easy to achieve symmetrical designs. I do recommend you giving it a watch if you haven't yet. Symmetry is key in this process. Not perfect symmetry, but a close approximation. So after transferring the design onto the bug's body, we can move on to painting. We'll be using the same approach as we did with the botanical flowers. It's simple and it has visual appeal. For this, you'll need a soft, pointed tip brush. The thickness of the lines will depend on how much pressure you apply. Keep in mind, this is a fantasy bug, okay? So it's not something that you find in nature. So we are not aiming for anatomical accuracy. That said, it is still important to make it bug-like enough so people can easily recognize it as an insect. When viewed from afar, the bug should look fairly natural, but up close, there should be a fun, artistic twist. So here is our first bug. Now let's move on to our second one. Spoiler alert, this is my favorite one of this series, okay? There's something about this little blue one that I absolutely love. Since blue is my favorite color, I wanted to create a porcelain-like effect to this one. I always mark out the pattern before painting it because it makes the process smoother and more symmetrical. For this kind of design, symmetry is very important. One of the things that I love about watercolor is that it naturally creates texture. No need to worry too much about that. As you can see, All I'm doing here is lightly touching the brush to the paper. Each piece took me about 20 to 30 minutes. And even though this is the longest video in this series, I made my best to compress all the useful footage into a shorter video. I had to make some quick edits since the original footage was over 3 hours long. But I have included the timestamps so you can jump to a specific section if you want. For the shadows, I am using a very diluted paint mixture to create a soft, see-through effect. So let's move on to another bug, and this one is completely imaginary, okay? Once again, we're just using what we know about insect anatomy to create our round bug. While painting, it is crucial to let the paint dry completely between layers. This ensures the best results, especially when adding detailed ornamentation. Next up, we'll try another fantasy bug. Once again, this doesn't exist in nature, but we are applying some basic principles of insect anatomy to keep it somewhat familiar, okay? I wasn't happy with how this one turned out. It simply didn't work for me, but that's part of the process. Sometimes things don't go as planned, and that's okay. It's all about experimenting and learning with it. Now we are going to paint what was supposed to be a fly. But again, this is not something that you will find in the natural world because most winged insects have two pairs of wings. But for the sake of simplicity, we are just giving this one a single pair. For the wing design, I am using a very pale blue to create a transparent effect. After applying the details, I'll wait until everything is fully dry before adding the shadows. If you want this to be just a bug, like the natural bug without the ornaments, you only have to make the body darker. But I am adding the ornaments to make it more interesting. As you can see, all I'm doing here is lightly touching the brush to the paper. Next up, it's a moth design. So I start by sketching the body lightly, then applying layers of shadows. The key here is to make the brush very watery. It will grant the transparent areas. I have also used both white and blue for the wing ornaments, which adds more depth and interest. The pattern for the moth's body is simple, and I'm using the same design as the wings, just with a different color. Now let's paint another beetle. This one is going to have muted tones, mostly brown, with some subtle accents. For the legs, I'm just applying light pressure to the brush to create simple shapes. Once it's dry, I'll add highlights to the legs to give them more visual interest. You can see how easy it is to create the insect's legs. And it is easy to capture that with just a few brush strokes. Once everything is dry, I can add more details. Before we go, I wanted to revisit the ladybug from the first exercise in the previous video. She didn't have any decorations like these ones, so I felt a little bit sad for her. So I decided to give her a makeover and add some Art Deco patterns. So I'm using the same template as before, but instead of just the red with the black spots, I'm going to create a more intricate design. And let's see how it turns out. Okay, so I hope you have enjoyed this exercise and that it inspires you to create your own Art Deco bugs or just simple bugs, okay? As always, keep on practicing and thank you for joining us.